Hello. Now we are going to talk about a science-based passage. We have discussed about different techniques of reading in terms of reading the first paragraph, the last paragraph, and whenever you read a paragraph, try to understand the theme, the example, and the explanation. Also, keep on writing the headings for every paragraph. We also discussed about transition words like but or however, which relate to U-turn, and words like further and furthermore, which expand an idea. After that, we saw a type of narrative passage where there is a story depicted. It could be an emotive story, it could be something related to philosophy, or it could be impregnated with some kind of lesson for us. And that was the first type of passage that we did. In SATs, the first passage would always be a narrative passage, and the second passage would mostly be from science or from philosophy or humanities. So now we are going to discuss about science-based passage and the ways to uh, decipher, understand a science-based passage. So let me just share my screen quickly, and we'll learn some techniques, and then we'll do a passage together. Okay, so a science-based passage usually has a very specific structure, or a very, I can say, a predefined structure, wherein it starts with an unknown problem first. So there is an unknown problem, some phenomena which is not very clear. After that, they start with an experiment. So in order to have clarity about that unsolved mystery, there would be some experiment. They will do an experiment wherein they can have a control group, which is the normal group, and the experiment group, which is the one on which they would do certain experiments. Like, for example, we want to understand the effect of, let's say, a certain medicine on corona patients. So what we will do is we will have two groups of patients, and on one group we will administer that medicine, and we will call that as experimental group, and on the other group we will not give that medicine, and we'll study the impact of that medicine. Eventually, if we find that the group which was given the medicine shows better results, we can conclude that yeah, this is an effective medicine. But if we do not get any conclusive results, we can say that the experiment was did not give anything conclusive. So this is what happens, that there is an assumption or an unsolved mystery. They do some experiment. Based on the experiment, there are certain results, as we see, and then based on results, there are certain actions. So let's take an example quickly and understand how we do a science-based passage. As you did earlier, I would request you to first read this passage. I'll share the screen there with you once again, so you would be able to see it. And so this is the screen. This is test 9. You've already downloaded this test earlier when you were doing the passage. So if you simply go to Google and write down SAT test 9, you will be able to download this test paper. So I would request you to download it and read this passage. This is the second passage. I would request you to pause this video and download this passage, and then we can go about solving it together. So I hope you have read this passage. This passage is about the impact of internet on our memory. What it tells is that with the advent of internet, now most of the times we do not really bother about information. We bother about where the information is stored. So when somebody is asked a difficult question, instead of answering the question directly, the person tells Google it or Yahoo. So this is what is the impact um, of these impact of information revolution or internet is on our memory. Now we are not inclined to remember the facts and figures. We are more inclined to remember the source from where we can get that fact or figure. And this is what this particular story talks about. There are different experiments done, and uh, the ultimate conclusion is that we still require memory, but the need for memory is more towards remembering the source of information rather than what is the information. So that's about this particular passage, and we're going to do the questions together now. Okay. So again, when you read the passage, you should go with the first and the last paragraph, and then you should go about doing the rest of them. So let us see what is happening here. Search engines have changed the way, so they are talking about some kind of change the way we use the internet, putting vast sources of information just so. Okay, so in internet, they're talking about internet as a source of information. Then, but so there is a U-turn here, and as I said, there are certain signpost words. But so this professor of psychology at this place proves that websites and internet are changing much more than technology itself. So it's not just about technology; they are changing the way our memories function. So what is the impact of internet on our memory? Is what it is saying that the functioning of memory has changed. I'll go to the last paragraph now to understand what is the story. And even though we may not be taxing our memories to recall distinct facts, so now they are talking about memory and how we use our memory, we are still using them to consider where the facts are located. So the keyword is where the facts are located and how to access them. So we use memory to access where the information is stored, not the content itself. We still have to remember things. This guy explains. We are just remembering a different range of things. So we still need memory, but we need memory for a different purpose to store the source of information, not the information itself. Believes that his study will lead to further research. So, which means this is not conclusive. It will pave the way for further research into understanding computer dependence and looks forward to tracing the extent of human interdependence with computer world, pinpointing the movable dividing line between us and our computers and cyber networks. So basically, a very philosophical kind of end, as if computer is just an extension of our memory. So further research will be conducted in this field. Well, so this is the passage all about the impact of internet on how we remember things and how much we remember and how the whole thing has got revolutionized. And then there is this graphic which shows that when the people were asked certain questions, most of them didn't remember anything, neither the source nor the information. And a few of them were able to remember both of the things, which where the information is stored or in what, not folder locations. Okay, so a few of them, this is the least number where people simply remember the information but not where it is stored. And most of the guys know remember folder location, not the statement. So these guys simply remembered the location, and these were the people who remembered both. So this is both. All right, fine. So this is the whole passage. You can, again, in case you've not read it, you can read it and then we can go straight to the question. The main purpose of the passage is to describe a series of experiments on the way technology interferes with critical thinking. Well, critical thinking or simply thinking, I would say maybe. And series of experiments would be like one after other, lots of experiments done. So I have my doubts for this one. Assert that people have become overly dependent. See, there is nothing like over. It's not a commentary. It's just talking about the experiment and its results. It's not giving its own judgment. So when you say overly dependent, it is a judgment. The passage does not try to give any judgment here. It's just description of the experiment and the results. Discuss the idea that humans' capacity for memory is much weaker. Does not talk about weaker or stronger than it once was. So again, gone. Share the findings of a study examining the effect of computer use on memory recall. Well, of course, I think this is the most precise one because computers are used and we are trying to understand uh, memory recall. So when we recall the memory, we now try to understand the source rather than the information itself. So kind of projects the thought in the best possible words. Now, again, series of experiments on the way technology interferes with critical thinking. Now, see, storing information and critical thinking are two different things. This is important to understand. We are not talking about critical thinking. Thinking is different from storing, memorizing information. So, it's not about critical thinking or analytical thinking. It's more about how much information we can store. And if we don't know the source of information, what do we do? Next question says, which choice best supports the idea that reliance on computers does not necessarily diminish human memory? Diminish is like lessen in importance. So at the end of the passage, they said this. So if you read these lines, 72 to 75, this is the place where they say that now we need to rely on a different source of information, or the content that we store in our memory is different from the content we used to store earlier. Earlier, we used to remember the statements themselves, but now we are more about where the information is. How can I get it? Like, for example, if some difficult question is asked, we are more interested in uh, the memory tries to tell that, okay, Google it. So that's what it talks about. So the importance of memory is not diminished, just that the content has got changed. In context, the reference to remembering a relative's birthday. Now, this is, they have given an example here. So we are talking about, so if we do not remember a person's birthday, what do? We actually ask our family members what was the birthday of this XYZ person, which means we are asking our family members' memory as an extension of our memory. So that's what this passage is all about. It's giving a simple reference to describe this fact that we sometimes use an external memory source as an extension of our own. Show that people who are closely related tend to have shared memories. Not really, and not always. Demonstrate how people initially developed external source of memory. There is nothing like initially and later something, so this is not the case. Emphasize the effectiveness. We are not talking about effectiveness and accuracy again, that is out of context. Illustrate the concept of transactive memory source using familiar situations. So transactive memory, this is the word used in the paragraph, in the second paragraph in the passage, where they talk about a transactive memory. Transactive memory is the memory which is used for just one transaction. So it's not something which we always use. Like, for example, we do not go to our mother or father to give us some information about everything which we want. For certain transactions, we use their memory. So it's an example of transactive memory. Based on the information in the passage, which of the following would be considered a transactive memory source? So what was transactive memory source? So let me just go to the passage and find out this keyword and just read for the sake of revision. Transactive memory source, they talk about this term somewhere in the second. Yeah, here I can see transactive memory source. Let me just try to understand the question when I have identified this keyword. I can read it once again. Based on the information in the passage, which of the following would be considered a transactive memory source? So what can be considered a transactive memory source is the question. And we understand transactive memory source is, they have defined a method by which our brains compartmentalize information. First hypothesized by this guy, transactive memory exists in many forms, as when a husband relies on his wife. So rather than using my mind, I am using my wife's mind to remember something. She gives information to me about something, a relative's birthday. And so basically, I'm using some other source of information in addition to my primary source or my own brain. So something which is used as a substitute for something else. So if I don't remember something, I can use something else, which is not by design, but just for this purpose I'm using. So something of that sort, they're asking us to give an example of this type of thing from the real world. Out of these, a souvenir brought home from a memorable trip. See, a souvenir just talk about what happened in some function. So we cannot call it as, or some trip, we cannot call it as a transactive memory source. So gone. So this one gone. A written list of users' passwords for different websites. So why do we make a list of passwords? We are supposed to remember them, but sometimes we refer to a list for easy access. And this looks like a transactive memory. Whenever we want, we look at this book of passwords and get it. A library database. Now, this is confusing. This also seems like a transactive memory source database that helps users locate specific books. So there is a collection of books and you want to locate that books, and there is a database which is like an index. So we refer to the index and tell, okay, fine, in the third column the book is there, and we go there and get it. Can this be called as a source of transactive memory or an example of transactive memory? Well, no, because we already have this catalog with this purpose. We are not supposed to remember the source of, I mean, the place where the books are kept, you know. So transactive memory is like a temporary memory which is just for that very purpose, for that very moment. And the situation is that we are supposed to remember something. Like, for example, generally we are supposed to remember the birthday of our relative ourselves, but we ask somebody else because we forget it. Similarly, generally we are supposed to remember the passwords of all whatever websites we access, but then if we tend to forget it, we make a list of it. But then in case of a library, by design, we have got a database. There is nothing like forgetting something, and that's why you're doing it. On the first place, you are not remembering anything by itself, and that is why B is the right answer, not C. Website that helps users to plan and make travel plans. Well, this is not a transactive memory source, so D gone. The correct answer in this case is B. And this was a little tricky question. Whenever I do a tricky question of this sort, I write WAR on this, and this WAR stands for worth a revision. So whenever you get this kind of question which you want to revise, please mark WAR into your corrections log. As used in line 26, extension of means you are having some main source, and this is like the extension of this source. So you are saying extension of most nearly means. Let me go to line 26 and see what is going on. So if I go to line 26 all the way to this passage, okay, line 26 would be at this place here. You just have to remember who knows it. Now, computers and technology as well are becoming virtual extensions of our memory. So these are becoming virtual extensions of our memory, means they are also storing information in addition to our own brain. So what was the question? Extensions of means delays in, not really. Additions to, maybe. Lengths of, no. Development of, no. The answer would be addition to our memory. So extension of, like we are using it as an additional source. Okay, 16th, the discussion of the experiment suggests that people are inclined to think of specific information source in response to being. Now, this is a very interesting question, and the best way to understand the question is to paraphrase it first. Let's try to understand what the question is asking. The question is saying, discussion of an experiment. So some experiment is discussed, suggests that people are inclined to think of specific information source. So when do people inclined to, means they are incited, stimulated to think about information source. So when do people start thinking about the information source is the question. When you ask something, they start thinking about the information source. So if I ask you, where is Timbuktu? What will you tell me? Well, Google it, because you don't know where is Timbuktu. Or if somebody asks you, um, what is the weight of moon? So you don't know what is the weight of moon. What would you say? Well, Google it. So whenever some question is asked about which you are not very clear, or some trivia question, difficult question is asked to you, you do that. So if you, okay, we are supposed to look at the evidence also. So we will kind of, so now this is again interesting. Whenever you want to get this kind of, whenever you get this kind of question, there are two things. Where is the answer and what is the answer? And where is the answer is given here. Now see, 26, line number 26 is already discussed in question number 15. They did talk about line number 26. So by all means, this answer should be after line number 26. Let me just see and go and see what happens. The question is, when do we think about the source? What is that situation where rather than giving the information, you tell the source of information? And this is usually when we are when we are asked to answer a difficult question. So, see, here it is. After being asked a set of trivia questions, so what happens here in the experiment, participants demonstrated that they were more likely to think of computer terms like these after being asked a set of trivia questions. So when they are asked some trivia questions, rather than answering it, they tell the source of the question. So these were which lines? These were lines like 42 to 45 somewhere. So I will mark that particular question 42 to 45 here. This is the one. And when we are asked some trivia questions. Asked to provide this yeah, so not familiar to them. Asked to provide facts that are not familiar to them. At that time, they think about the source. So that's fine. We are done with this question. Question number 18. It says employ. What is the meaning of employ? So the way to do these kind of questions is just try replacing these words in that line. So if I'll go to line 67, 67 would be somewhere here, 65, 66, 67. And here the word employ is there. So let me just read it from here. Wagner concedes that question remains about whether dependence on computer will affect memories negatively. So this is unanswered question. Nobody knows now what the effects are there of these tools on logical thinking. Students who have trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to employ those facts. So they are talking about facts. Employ those facts would be like use those facts in critical thinking. So if I have to choose the word which is similar to employ, it would be utilize. Okay, now the next question. According to the graph, approximately what percentage of participants remembered both parts of the information to them during the fourth experiment? Both part means what is the information and where is the information. So what is the percentage of people who are able to remember both? Both means what is the information and where. Remember statements and folder locations. So this is both. Answer would be somewhere around 18% to 19%, whatever number. So I'll check the number which is nearest to 18% or 19%, which is this. Okay, based on the description of these guys, fourth experiment. Okay, so fourth experiment was there in which he asked about the source of information and all those things. So I'll go and check what is this fourth experiment. What is most likely explanation for the findings for the largest single group of participants represented in the graph? So what is this fourth experiment and what is this largest single group? Again, understanding the question is important. And this is one war question, like worth a revision question. Look at this. Based on the descriptions of this guy's fourth experiment. So we are talking about the fourth experiment. I'll just write this information. What is most likely explain? Now this is what it is. Most likely explanation. What is the meaning of most likely explanation? In simple words, what is the reason? So when you are trying to ask for explanation, you are asking a reason for the finding of the largest single group of participants represented in the graph. So now they are talking about largest single group in the graph. So what is the largest single group in the graph? The largest single group in the graph is of that this one, which means what is this? Remember nothing. So why do people remember nothing is the question. Give me an explanation. So according to the fourth experiment, so let me see if there's some word which is related to the fourth experiment. In the fourth experiment, here it is. Participants typed into computer statements that were told, uh, typed into a computer statements that were told would be saved in a specific folder. Okay, so there were two situations. To one, they said that in this folder the information would be saved, and to the other people they say that there is no folder. So no folder. And it was found that the people who were told that there is no folder, they were remembering more, and some kind of graph was generated. So basically this is the thing, they have done an experiment. To half the people they said that, we would be able to tell you the source where it is saved, and to others they said that we are not storing it. So the other group where they were told that we will not store information, stored, I mean remembered it. But then the question remains, the biggest group in the graph. So biggest group in the graph, what is the reason that they remember nothing? Well, there is nothing told about in the paragraph. They never said what is the reason that they are not able to remember. So the answer to this one would be, there is not enough information to determine the cause of the result. We don't know what is the cause. Why do people forget? This is the correct answer, but let's look at all others. Those participants did not attempt to remember any specific piece. We don't know. This is very counterintuitive and it's in the negative light, so they don't say anything of that sort. Those participants attempted to remember the statements and folder location. Attempted to means tried to. Again, we are not told whether they are making any effort for it. Those participants focused on remembering the folder locations. This is again not the case. However, they mention that they were focused only about location. So this one also gone. Well, we are done with this passage. So this was a typical science-based passage. Again, we read the technique wherein we first read the first and the last paragraph, and we did the passage based on the keywords and of course an unknown question, experiment, results, and inference from that. So whenever you get a science-based passage, you can use this technique. Thank you so much.